It's Wednesday, March 25th, 2026, and this is Washington in Focus Daily. I'm Carleen Johnson, the Center Square's state government reporter. I don't see the income tax bill scheduled for today on the governor's calendar. He does have several bill signings, though, scheduled, and one of those we have covered in prior episodes. Senate Bill 6182, which sets up a dedicated abortion fund that health insurance providers are going to have to pay into. In other words, it's going to be passed on to those covered through the state's subsidized healthcare programs. Despite objections that anyone might have to abortion, doesn't matter. You're going to pay that tax. Yesterday, on Tuesday, Governor Ferguson did sign the estate tax rollback, with backers conceding wealth flight worries. So they're worried the rich people with big houses are going to flee with a 35% tax on estates when they die, but they're not worried about rich people fleeing the income tax. So kind of a contradiction there potentially. Washington Roundtable is out with a new report on understanding our state's affordability crisis. And Roundtable President Rachel Smith will break that down. It's pretty fascinating. And my colleague Tim Clauser broke a major story on Tuesday with HUD, federal HUD, announcing an investigation into the Washington Housing Commission's race-based covenant home ownership program. So stick around for everything in today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. Let's get started. Governor Ferguson, again, not expected to sign the income tax bill today, Senate Bill 6346, the millionaire's tax. Critics suggesting he's potentially putting it off until the last day in early April, perhaps to shorten the time that opponents could have for a potential initiative to repeal it. It is sounding more like that initiative would come this year as opposed to next year, but there's nothing official announced. I'm in constant communication with the folks in the know on that, so you'll know first as soon as we find out. There is a rally planned for this Saturday by Washington State's GOP, March 28th at noon. They're calling it the Fight the Tyranny of Outrageous Taxation rally, basically urging Governor Ferguson to veto the illegal and unconstitutional income tax, they say. With massive capital flight already happening, the rally planners say it won't be long before, as they put it, greedy Democrats come after your hard-earned paycheck for all the rest of us that are not so lucky to be millionaires. So again, that is going to be happening this weekend. Now, Senate Bill 6347, which the governor did sign on Tuesday, rolls back the estate tax or the death tax to the level it was before lawmakers in the 2025 session increased that top rate to 35%. So why the rollback when we haven't even yet seen income from this? They're conceding that they're worried rich people are going to sell their house and get the heck out of Dodge to avoid giving the state more than a third, potentially, of their estate value upon their death. So Senate Majority Leader Jamie Peterson of Seattle, the one behind the income tax as well, he even admitted that he was hearing, he said anecdotally, that high net worth residents are considering relocating out of the state to avoid Washington's increased death tax. So again, last year it was raised the top level up to 35%. So far higher than the next highest rate of about 20% in Hawaii. So the highest rate applies to estates worth more than $12 million. So a little bit more than probably your house and mine. That's after a $3 million exemption. So this is Governor Ferguson at Tuesday's bill signing for the rollback of the increased estate tax.
Estate tax is a tax on the transfer of property at the time of death. Right now, Washington has the highest estate tax rate in the nation with a top rate of 35% following the passage of last year's revenue package. Senate Bill 6347 brings that rate back down to a top rate of 20%. This bill, which earned broad bipartisan support, ensures that Washington is not a significant outlier for our state tax rates. I appreciate the hard work of everybody on this legislation. It's an important bill. A big thank you, of course, to the sponsors, our prime sponsor, State Senator Claudia Kaufman, and the companion sponsor, State Representative Larry Springer. Please thank Claudia Kaufman for her hard work on this legislation as I sign it into law. Thank you so much for doing that.
So, according to the Department of Revenue, the estate tax has generated about $535 million a year over the last 5 years. And lawmakers projected before this rollback that the higher rates could push collections a bit higher to about $600 million a year. But keep in mind, the increase only took effect last June, and the first payments under that higher rate wouldn't be due until April, right? With this year's income taxes, meaning there's really not any hard data on how taxpayers may have responded to that or may not have responded. But now we've got the rollback, and so they're not going to see that higher rate. And we'll see if it encourages any more of the wealthy to stick around. Today, Governor Ferguson has signed Senate Bill 6182, very controversial because no matter how pro-life, anti-abortion you may be, if you have health insurance through one of the state subsidized plans through the Washington Health Benefit Exchange, you're going to be paying into a new abortion fund. Every month with your premiums, there's going to be an additional payment to fund this abortion fund. It will be administered by the Washington Department of Health and provide these grants to organizations that deliver, direct abortion care. It's really all for Planned Parenthood, as their federal funding, you may recall, was cut by the Trump administration. So now Washington taxpayers are going to fill that void, like it or not, through this mandatory assessment on health carriers. No room for any religious or moral objections. Representative Matt Marshall is sharply opposed.
Coming on the wake of this incredibly poorly managed program where the governor had bought tens of thousands of abortion tablets under executive order and gave it to DOC, and they're expiring and they haven't been used. Well, Democrats, yet again, are doubling down on abortions, trying to make it an issue going into the elections this November. Now, what this one does is it requires every health insurance plan in Washington to charge a fee, a tax, on every member in the state who has health insurance every single month. So I believe it's 86 cents per member per month that is going to go into a new account that's being created under this bill, and is going to fund Planned Parenthood or abortion providers only. It's incredibly troubling. My biggest concern is the fact that there's strong moral obligations or moral objections to abortion, and there's no opt-out provision here, and it is something that is required for every health insurance plan, even if it's one being provided by a religious employer or a pro-life employer. You're being forced by the state to pay into this fund with no other recourse. It's not going to go over well. I had an amendment today in committee that was denied by the majority party that simply restated the uses of this money was for reproductive services. And I specifically said that many families in the state of Washington, one of their big issues is having fertility treatments when they have fertility issues. A lot of insurances don't pay for that. So I was trying to split this new savings fund and the taxes collected off this surcharge and place them into fertility services, in vitro fertilization, other reproductive treatments, not just killing babies.
Now to Washington Roundtable's new report on Washington's affordability crisis. We are moving up the list on the most expensive places in the nation, according to this new report, and the affordability gap is widening. So from housing and utilities, food, transportation, how about your gas prices, everyday decisions about where and how people live, work, and plan for the future, are going to be based on whether or not you can afford to live here anymore. And my colleague Tim Clauser interviewed Rachel Smith, who heads up Washington Roundtable. So here's an overview from Rachel Smith on their affordability crisis report.
Washington now ranks as the 5th most expensive state in the country. Prices in Washington have actually risen faster than any other state, growing twice as fast as California, which is the most expensive state in the nation. Second point is that this is not just a Seattle story. And this was maybe the most striking point of the study from my perspective. All 12 metro areas in Washington rank in the top 25% most expensive in the country. Seattle ranks as the 5th most expensive MSA and is the highest priced metro outside of California. But 4 other Washington MSAs, Bremerton, Mount Vernon, Olympia, and Vancouver, rank in the top 10% nationally, which was pretty surprising for me. Third, it might actually be impacting who decides to live here. So we looked at between 2021 and 2023, Washington experienced a net loss of more than 55,000 residents, with most of them moving to lower cost states. Now, there's some meat in that data, and I don't think we can say causation, but it is an interesting thing to note. And then I would say, just sort of bottom line, the affordability gap here isn't just large, it's growing, and it's growing faster than anywhere else in the country.
So Smith noted that policy choices in Olympia, in the Washington legislature, and taxes and regulations compounding year after year always get passed on to consumers because, right, businesses can't afford to stay afloat if they don't, at least in part, pass those costs on to their customers. So here's what she had to say about the business impacts.
Businesses are the ones that set prices for everyday activities like taking your family out to eat or getting your refrigerator repaired. It is businesses that create most of the jobs that we have here in Washington state. And it is businesses that create, I would say, access to prosperity and sort of drive economic opportunity for people. And so that means that the policy choices that are being made matter a great deal, and taxes and fees and regulations do affect the cost of doing business. And when those costs rise, we're seeing that they show up in the prices that families ultimately pay. And I would say, the goal is not to eliminate all of those things, taxes and fees and regulation, but we do think that the system needs to be balanced and competitive. I say often it's rarely a good thing when the state is an outlier in something like taxes or the regulatory environment. And I think we just can't have the kind of situation where Washington has kind of the highest everything, having the highest estate tax matched only by Hawaii, having one of the 5th highest capital gains taxes in the nation, now the 5th highest income tax in the nation for those who are going to pay it, plus, payroll taxes and, a number of other sort of things that drive expenses. And we should endeavor to be balanced in thinking about the tax and regulatory environment that we need and the prices that we want passed on to consumers.
So the Washington Roundtable report summary basically says, when it comes to tax policy, Washington, they suggest, should endeavor to be kind of average. High cost states also have high taxes. So being an outlier, they say, is rarely a good thing. And so understanding what these cost drivers are, and then maybe trying to make more intentional choices about those things matter in the state of Washington. And you can check out that entire report at Washington Roundtable's website. It is WA, so W-A, roundtable.com, WAroundtable.com for that entire report. And now hats off to my colleague, Tim Klauser, who typically covers Central and Eastern Washington with a heavy focus on Spokane, but he also follows a lot of statewide issues and helped me out during the legislative session by covering some of the bills that I didn't have the bandwidth to pay attention to. Tim Klauser put up an exclusive story on Tuesday. You can check that out at the Center Square Washington's page. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development launched this fair housing investigation into Washington State's Housing Finance Commission. And this is all over the race-based covenant home ownership program. We've written about that extensively at the Center Square Washington page. So Tim was first to get the letter from HUD to say, we're coming after Washington's Department here of Housing and Urban Development, and we are targeting this covenant home ownership program, which they basically say, yeah, it's a race-based program, but it's racist, and they say that's not going to fly any longer with the Trump administration. So here's that story with my colleague Tim Klauser. Welcome to Washington in Focus. I'm the Center Square's state government reporter, Carleen Johnson. Along with me today, our Eastern Washington correspondent, Tim Clauser, who today has put up an article, an exclusive from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. First to report here at the Center Square that the HUD is now investigating Washington State's Housing Finance Commission over a race-based covenant home ownership program. This is a pretty significant story, something we've written about extensively over the last couple of years here at the Center Square. So, Tim, what happened today and how'd you get the scoop?
Yeah, so HUD sent a letter to the State Housing Finance Commission's executive director, Steve Walker, this morning, essentially notifying them of HUD's investigation into the commission's covenant homeownership program. And this program, as I'm sure you know, Carleen, we've all reported on it. It's this race-based program that provides 0% interest loans and down payment assistance to racial minorities. And there's a list of minorities that apply, and it doesn't include all of them. So the feds are essentially saying that, look, this violates the Fair Housing Act in their view. And that's a 1968 law that Congress passed in the wake of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that prohibits discrimination in real estate based on protected classes, including race and national origin, which is what they're trying to get at in this one. And the state law passed in 1969, the Washington Law Against Discrimination, it also prohibits this. So the state essentially created this program as a way to offset a history of housing discrimination through what they call racially restrictive housing covenants. Now, housing covenants are these legally binding rules that you can put in a property that say how the property can be used and maintained. But these racially restrictive ones or in the past made it so certain races couldn't buy homes or live in them. So those were already illegal more than a decade before the state even created the commission, and decades before it created this covenant homeownership program. But the state's still saying, look, this is our way to offset that history of housing discrimination. And HUD's basically saying, look, under the Trump administration, we're not going to stand for that.
Wow. And I thought it was interesting. One of the comments that was in the letter that was sent to the Washington State Housing Commission says, this government-sponsored housing experiment appears to dole out spoils based on race and ancestry, which, I guess you can't really argue against that criticism, if you want to call it that, at this point. And I know there's been legal challenges, and this has been upheld over the years. So I wonder how the Housing Finance Commission is going to respond, because they felt emboldened to even expand it. Wasn't it last year in 2025? And I think you included this in your article today, Tim, that they kind of expanded this program a little bit.
Yeah, we could touch on a few things there. So first, it is already facing a federal lawsuit. And initially, a federal judge in the Western District Court of Washington State dismissed that lawsuit, and then it was refiled. The plaintiff asked for a preliminary injunction, which pretty much would have just suspended the program until they get to a final ruling. The judge denied that, so the lawsuit is still going on. They're just waiting on a final ruling. So Steve Walker, the director of the state commission, told its lenders to just proceed as normal. But yes, they did expand the law in 2025 from basically having, if a household had an income of 100% AMI, which is just 100% of the area and media income, then it would apply for this program. And the state expanded that in 2025 to include 120% of the area and media income. So for King County, the most populous county in the state, and it also has the highest AMI in the state, that would be $188,000. So if your family's making that much, yes, you still qualify. And the expansion also provides loan forgiveness to anyone at or below 80% AMI if they've lived in the home for 5 years. So you could get a massive check to help you save money on your homes at a 0% interest loan. And then if you don't pay it off or pay it at all for 5 years, you could potentially have that loan forgiven still. And I do want to touch on who qualifies for this program, because it is very specific. To qualify for the program, you must provide proof that you have a living or deceased parent, grandparent, or great-grandparent that lived in the state prior to 1968 who is, quote, Black, Hispanic, Native American, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander, Korean, or Asian Indian. It notably does not include people of European descent, Japanese, Arab populations, and those of Jewish ancestry, which HUD brings up in its letter as evidence that the program could potentially be illegal.
So I want to back up a minute because you said when they raised the income threshold where you could still qualify, somebody making $180,000, make sure I got this right, based on the color of their skin, if they fall into one of those categories you just listed, Tim, that person could qualify for this big loan for down payment on a house and then live there for 5 years and then have that wiped clean, not have to pay it back. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, but with some caveats.
Okay.
So I would say um, these loans don't cover the entire purchase of the home.
Right.
It's a portion of that. So
Right.
that portion could potentially be forgiven. You have to be below the 80% AMI. So for King County, 120% AMI is that $188,000 figure a year.
Okay.
So
Okay.
to give forgiveness, you would have to be below that number at whatever the 80% AMI would be. But yes, you are able to have those loans forgiven.
Wow. I mean, this program I know has been touted by supporters as sort of, groundbreaking, right? In Washington state, sort of leading the way. And many people that were opponents had just said it's basically reparations. And I'm wondering what the ramifications could be for some of the other race-based home lending or loan forgiveness or debt forgiveness programs that we have in the state based on this investigation now going on. I wonder if is, and I know that the federal government has been looking into some of those other programs that we've reported on, but this could be pretty significant. I wonder, does HUD have the ability to basically say you can't run this program the way you've been running it anymore, Washington?
I think that is one of their options. And I think it's important to note that to some extent, the federal government does allow to give, say, special benefits, like in this case, to racial minorities. But there's tight regulations around that. And how that's enforced could depend on whichever administration is in power. So this administration is interpreting this current program as a violation of the Fair Housing Act and is going to look into that in its investigations. And it says that should the investigation yield findings that the state broke the law with this program, that it will file a civil rights complaint against the state, and if it rises to it, charges of discrimination against the commission.
Wow, that's fairly significant. I wonder if they knew this was coming, if the Washington State, Housing Finance Committee, if they knew this was coming today or had any inkling of it, or if this was, pretty shocking to them to have HUD get involved.
Yeah, well, I reached out to Steve Walker, the State Housing Finance Commission's executive director, first thing this morning, and I think I caught them a little bit off guard. I left a voicemail. It didn't get a call back, but I did get a response to my email to the comm staff for the commission that essentially just said that this is kind of the first that they're hearing of it, and they're declining to give a comment at this time as they're still waiting on more information from HUD. But it did appear based off that email that it did come as somewhat of a surprise to them. But I think they're not at all surprised that the Trump administration is looking into various programs in Washington state, as there's several ongoing lawsuits and other investigations involving educational programs and other spending items.
Yeah, as you referenced in your article, the community reinvestment program, and a lot of these were, there was attempts during this legislative session that just ended recently to expand some of those. At the same time, opponents were attempting to push back and say, wait a minute, we've got some issues here, potential self-dealing going on. So to have the attention of the Trump administration on that, I would think folks that, are in charge of deciding who gets these, big loans or potentially even loan forgiveness, they know they've got some scrutiny on them now. I wonder if it's going to, maybe tighten the reins on that stuff going on a little bit.
Yeah, and supporters of this state program, they say that essentially, look, this is in the name of racial equality, given the states and countries past of housing discrimination. But the Trump administration is saying, look, under our leadership, we're going to provide fair housing for everyone, and that's not limited to racial minorities or the racial majority. Everyone is entitled to a fair opportunity to buy a home, and they're saying that this program goes directly against that, no matter what its motives might be.
Yeah, that part of the statement that the HUD secretary sent in that letter, I was reading in your article. Basically, he starts out, he says, DEI is dead at HUD. I think that kind of has been a recurring theme, whether it's state agencies or programs like this that have been very generous to certain folks while leaving others out. I think the Trump administration is saying that doesn't fly anymore. So it's going to be interesting. Do we have any idea how long these investigations take, or if they actually send somebody out here to like meet with these guys, or do you have any idea how this practically plays out, the investigative piece?
I'm not exactly sure how this is going to play out. I got a hold of the letter that HUD sent to Steve Walker just as it was coming out, and we reported on it and broke the story. That'll be something that we'll have to dig into in a follow-up story, but I'm
Yeah.
sure the process is somewhat extensive. It's not going to be a day or a week-long thing likely. And this federal lawsuit over the Covenant Homeownership Program has been in play for, I want to say, a year and a half or so from the time it was initially filed and then dismissed and then refiled, and the various motions that it's gone through. But I think this could take some time, but it will be really interesting to see where this plays out, and if potentially the state will cut this program in the future, uh, potentially providing equality to everyone. But at the same time, one more thing that I want to touch on the program is that in the first fiscal year that it was in place, it helped. I have the number right in front of me. It helped 547 home buyers purchase a home in that first fiscal year. Uh, and that was because the commission doled out over $60 million in these grants. There's a lot of
Wow.
money going behind this program. And you spoke to the Community Reinvestment Program, another related program that offers similar loans. The state put hundreds of millions of dollars behind that program. And it also, eligibility is somewhat limited to certain racial groups. So it will be interesting to see if the feds intervene and cut one or both of these programs in the future, how the state will respond, and what will end up, how those tax dollars will end up being spent in the future.
Well, it's fascinating. Kudos to you for breaking this story. And I really appreciate your investigative work on this, Tim. The title of the article, which is up on our Center Square Washington page, is HUD Launches Investigation into Race-Based Washington Housing Program. Tim Clauser, thank you for being with us today on this episode of Washington in Focus. And if you haven't yet seen it, I encourage you to check out Tim's story. The headline is HUD Launches Investigation into Race-Based Washington Housing Program. And you can find that at the Center Square Washington's page. So that's it for today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. Thanks for watching.